Hello, I'm Finn Eirik Johansen, Professor of Bioscience at University of Oslo and member of the Working Group for Research Assessment appointed by University of Norway. In February this year, we delivered our report, which includes a guide for research assessment, to the Board of University of Norway. In this presentation, I will give a brief introduction to NORCAM. There's a need for change for several reasons. Open science is about making the output from science qualitatively better, more in line with society's needs, and more democratic. I do not have time to dive into arguments for open science, but if we want open science to become the new norm, we need to assess and incentivize scientists in a different way than we do today. Universities are expected to deliver in many areas, but many academic activities are not systematically assessed, valued, or rewarded. There's therefore a need to assess and recognize a greater breadth of competencies. DORA, quantitative research results do not always serve as a valid proxy for research quality. We therefore need to reduce and modify the reliance on quantitative publication metrics. Finally, we need to make it clear what gives merit. If we want the brightest minds to join academia, we need to show that research is an attractive career and how people can advance and contribute in the academic world. Members of the working group were from the three largest universities in Norway. In addition, we had strong connection to the EUA Expert Committee for Open Science and the Academy for Young Researchers of Norway. Importantly, the Research Council of Norway was included in the working group, and we had very expert advice and help from Gunnar Sivertsen, who is a researcher on research assessment itself, as well as the Secretariat of Universities of Norway. The first thing we did was to look around and see what was going on elsewhere. We were particularly impressed by the Dutch report, Room for Everyone's Talents. And also, we spent a lot of time reading and discussing the EUA report, Evaluation of Research Careers, Fully Acknowledging Open Science Practice. In addition, we also organized a pan-European meeting where many ideas about research assessment in the open science era was discussed. Eventually, we settled on 6 principles for how a new research assessment framework should work. First, it should measure quality and excellence through a better balance between quantitative and qualitative assessments. Bibliometric indicators should be used with caution and supplemented with other information. It should recognize several competencies as merits, but not expect fulfillment in all areas by each employee. It's the universities themselves that are responsible for fulfillment of the law, not each individual employee. All results, activities, and competence should be assessed in the light of open science principles, but still, of course, quality in all areas is the most important. Assessment should practice transparency and should be visible to those being assessed, what is recognized as merits. Assessment should promote gender balance and diversity, and we believe that changes in the assessment criteria to include a broader scope of competencies will do so. Finally, the assessment should be working to assist local institutions, hiring committees, and so forth, so that it is implemented in practice. NORCAM, the Norwegian Career Assessment Matrix, has 4 columns and 6 main rows. The 4 columns, column 1 is the area of competence and accomplishments, and this is divided into six rows. I will show that in a minute. The second row is the result and competences, so the actual outputs. This is not an exhaustive list, and this is meant to be very flexible so that users of NORCAM can add their own elements to this list, or they can remove those that are not relevant for their own use of NORCAM. The third column is documentation, and it relies heavily on the National Research Information System of Norway, CRISTI, but also other databases. But there are some areas that should be assessed where there is not a good database, and so we also need to include a narrative, which is part of anyone's CV. The fourth column we have included deals with reflection, and this is because we think that those persons that are being assessed should be able to include their own subjective assessment of their results and competences as part of the assessment. To give an example of column 2, for the first heading, research outputs, we have included published works, data sets, software methodologies, artistic results, and research reports. So not just the published work, but also what's behind there. And of course, making this open science, making data sets fair, making software accessible to others should also be counted as positive. The 6 areas of competence that we have included is research outputs, as I just showed you, research process, pedagogical competence, impact and innovation, leadership, and other experience. We have extracted research process as a separate area from research outputs. And in this area, we include things like building research teams, doing interdisciplinary research, research integrity, and participating in sort of research community housekeeping work, which is often not so much recognized. We have included other experience because we think that research will benefit from the ability of individuals to move between sectors. So in and out of research, for instance, and then competences could be acquired in other sectors that would be a benefit for the research that people are going to do at a later time point. We do not want researchers to spend all their time making CVs for various purposes. So we have also proposed an Automagic CV function that retrieves data from databases and makes the CV appropriate for the appropriate use, application for a job, for a grant by the Research Council of Norway. And we imagine that this could be incorporated into a national system similar to what Kristin is today. Finally, who does what? We think that universities and research institutions should adapt the principles behind NORCAM and incorporate it into their HR policy. It's important then that scientific committees, assessment committees are instructed to use these principles so that when they are assessing applicants for jobs, for instance, these principles are used. It's also important that national committees on promotion from associate to full professor are aware of the NORCAM and that NORCAM is incorporated into the framework for appraisal or promotion from associate to full professor. We think funders should use NORCAM as the basis for assessing the applicants and projects participants' competences with assessing research projects. Of course, the most important part for funders will always be the project itself. But when they assess if the candidates or the applicants have the ability to carry out the project, they should use NORCAM to assess the candidates. And we think that academic staff can use NORCAM to basically stake out a path for their own career and have a career which doesn't have to be in only one area, but through the years, you can also shift with emphasis from one area to the other, or they can have a stronger area in one, a stronger emphasis on one area than another throughout their career if they want. Finally, the question that I've been asked most often when I presented NORCAM to various groups is that, what about international mobility? And research activity is in its very nature international, and Norway cannot do this alone. Therefore, I'm happy that other European countries are transforming their research assessment system the same way that we are doing, or hoping that we are doing. And also the European Union and the European Research Area are very much into assessing research in a different way than they have done in the past. If you want to know more about NORCAM, you can Google it and find it easily. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.